terms of M&A going wrong, culture. If you add people to your organization, not just clients, but particularly employees or other advisors, the fit has to be really, really perfect. Or at least incredibly workable and flexible, because when you run into a situation where you have someone who's not necessarily doing it the way that all of us want to agree to do it, then you have some conflict.
Welcome, Model FAs. David DeSell here, president of Model FA and your host of the Model FA podcast. And we are bringing Eric Brotman to you today. He is the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors. He's the author of a book called Don't Retire, Graduate, Building a Path to Financial Freedom and Retirement at Any Age. And he's also a podcast host of Don't Retire, Graduate. I know there's a lot of advisors out there that are thinking about launching a podcast for yourself. So I would encourage you to go and check out that podcast, Don't Retire, Graduate, see what Eric is doing and see if it's something that you could ultimately weave into your business as well. But without further ado, Eric, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Great to be here.
Well, let's dive right in. So I always like to start with just a little bit of background. How'd you get into the industry in the first place? Did you go straight from school to being an advisor, or what was that journey like at the onset?
Like so many financial advisors, it was an accident. And I say that lovingly because there isn't a traditional career path like a CPA would have or a lawyer would have. I actually was an English major. I studied English and psychology and took a job in the legal department for a brokerage firm here in Baltimore, and fell in love with the financial side more than the legal side, decided ultimately not to go to law school, and started my financial practice in 1994. Which is dating me, and it's unbelievable. But I launched BFG Financial Advisors in 2003, and so we're celebrating our 20th anniversary currently. It's kind of an amazing thing.
Well, congratulations, and I
thank you.
Always bust chops when I have the ability to do so. I was entering preschool when you were starting the firm.
but you were already master of the spreadsheet. I know it.
in the midst of. Yeah. So we have quite a few topics that we had discussed in advance of this recording that I'm excited to unpack for you. So I think, a lot of times an advisor can go through this particular exercise as like, well, we got to do this as we launch the firm. But oftentimes it can get like put on the shelf and not necessarily reviewed. And it's the idea of coming up with both your personal and your firm's mission. Yep. So I'm curious to know your thoughts and I guess importance of an advisor determining what their mission is to determine ultimately what matters most to the firm. What are your thoughts on a mission for a company?
I think any company needs to have that. And frankly, any professional needs to have that, because you have to know your why. If you don't know your why, the other questions really become immaterial. So to me, a mission, and the firm's mission, is to empower families through financial literacy. And we take financial literacy, financial planning, and then financial freedom as a continuum. And there's nothing particularly unique necessarily about that. And I think a lot of advisory firms, we spend so much time trying to stand out from a very crowded field. And sometimes it's nice to have your own niche or your own unique mission. But ultimately, we chose to be a firm where we're general practitioners. We chose to be a firm where we don't have asset minimums and we can work with folks across the financial spectrum. And our mission is very much to empower those families, and that's been our mantra since day one, and it's stuck with us all this time.
So if I'm an advisor and I hear that and I say, "Hey, that sounds good for Eric and his firm," but for one reason or another that doesn't necessarily resonate with me, what would you encourage advisors to do from a logistical standpoint in terms of like what's the first step to determine what your mission is? And then furthermore, how often should that be reviewed on a go forward basis? Like, how do you lean into that mission beyond just the creation of it?
Great questions. I'm going to go in reverse order here. I think it should be reviewed at least annually with your entire team, where you actually sit down, you read it over, you make sure it still resonates with everyone. You make sure, particularly if you've had new hires that year, that they feel part of that. And I think that's important. So I'd say at least annually. In terms of the importance of building it, and in terms of having a process, I think it helps to have an executive coach or someone outside of your organization walk you through that exercise. A coach or consultant or someone who can put you and all of your team on the same side of the table. So this isn't something that your team feels like you've ordained. This is something you've all come up with together, because you need to be beating that same drum. And if we as entrepreneurs have this mission and this calling, but our team isn't on board with it, or they sort of check the box and say, yeah, we know what it is, you're not going to get the same passion and the same collaboration with them. So I think it's important to be on the same side of the table. And I like using a third party to help flesh that out, at least initially. After that, you don't need to.
Shameless plug. I would agree to hire a consultant, wink, wink, to help with that. Are you also, Eric, are you sharing this with your clients? And if you are, how do you do that? Or if not, why don't you do that?
Well, the first thing we do is we take it to our advisory board. So we've been running an advisory board of predominantly, but not exclusively, clients now for 15 years. And that is a group of folks who volunteer to meet with us twice a year, plus be part of focus groups and ad hoc things where we need them, and to be not only advocates for the firm, but to give us the unbridled truth that we need to hear. And we will take mission or vision or value statements and those kinds of things to them to make sure they don't fall flat on our audience, because we don't really know what it's like to be a client of our own firm. I mean, my wife and I meet with one of the other advisors here because it's good to have a second set of eyeballs, and we still don't really know what it's like to be a client of our. We can't feel it in the same way as someone who's outside of those walls every day, who's then part of this. And so I think it's helpful to have your target audience weigh in on and possibly even help create some of those statements.
So I wasn't planning on going in this direction, but you bring up a pretty important thing, and we actually encourage advisors to do the same thing. Are you familiar with Dan Allison in the industry by chance?
I'm not.
So he, one of the things he's been speaking on for the last 20 years is a referral marketing process. But the other thing that he encourages is to create advisory boards. And I think that a lot of advisors can be hesitant to do so, sort of like hesitant to open up the hood and being human and showing vulnerability and asking for help with the people that are viewing you as an expert in your field. So I kind of want to talk about your experience in that advisory board. What was the precipice of forming that, and what sort of value have you received from that advisory board? Because maybe we can dispel some of the hesitations that folks have in creating one of their own.
Well, the impetus behind starting the advisory board came from the consultant who we had hired when we were in the first 5 years of building this business, which is one of the reasons why I do the consulting and I believe in it, is because we actually benefited from it. And I hired a third party also. And we were encouraged to consider an advisory board. We actually had our consultant facilitate our first advisory board meeting, which I've now done for other firms. It's incredibly valuable to have that not be a total maiden voyage. And it's not a boondoggle. It's not just an excuse to eat. I mean, it really has to be a working board to make this valuable. I can give you a couple of success stories because we've gotten unbelievable value from the advisory board. we have no brochure. We have no company collateral that was like a handout or a leave behind. We've never done it. And a couple of years ago, probably almost 10 now, we had put together a piece that we labored over. I mean, we wordsmithed it and designed it and paid for it and printed it. And it was like, here we are. We found our thing and we took it to our advisory board. We had a box of them. And we took it to the advisory board and they all said, this is garbage. They actually said it more sternly than that, but I'm keeping the show clean. But they said, this is garbage. They said, it's not unique. It doesn't sound like you. We get 3 of these in the mail every week from somewhere and throw them away. And so we took them and we threw them immediately in the garbage and they never saw the light of day. And the fact that we didn't swing and miss with the public and with our full clientele was an invaluable thing. You know, another lesson we learned from our advisory board, we were looking at hiring someone to do marketing and PR and media relations, and I didn't know the first thing about it. And now I do a whole lot of that, but at the time I knew nothing. And I didn't even know how to write an RFP to say, how do I choose who to hire? I don't know how to do this. This isn't what I do. I know the financial planning, but I don't know the PR and media and so forth. And so we assembled a part of our advisory board who really had some knowledge in that area. And we brought 5 or 6 folks together and we had a think tank and we built an RFP and we sent it out. And I received proposals from various firms and I sent them to the advisory board and said, what do you think? And we wound up having what was functionally a vote. And at the time, I was outvoted, and it wasn't meant to be a democracy. It was just, what do you think? I was outvoted like 15-2. Like the firm I was ready to hire was the one they all said, no, that's not what you want. You want this group over here. And it was one of the best decisions we ever made. And I literally would have screwed that up too. And I say that in a self-deprecating way, but it's not what I do for a living. It's no more than I can pick the best auto mechanic or the best dentist. I can't. And so we used our advisory board to help us. They've guided us in hiring professionals. They've guided us in branding. They've helped be ambassadors and advocates for us with open houses and company events. And you know, they're on our website. We have a tab on our website for advisory board so that their bios and photos, and these are folks, we promote the fact that it exists so that someone in the public who wants to know a little bit about us has someone they can contact. And so, you know, at the end of the day, the advisory board's been great. We've been meeting now for 15 years, at least twice a year. And what's interesting is we started this in 2008. So we got very transparent. Because you talk about, well, what about the hesitancy? We got very transparent just in time for the global financial crisis to happen. And the timing was absolutely horrid. And yet it was invaluable. So, you know, I'm glad we did it. I've helped a lot of other firms do those kinds of things. And I do think it matters. You have to have stakeholder groups. And we have lots of them. That's just one of them.
Well, it's cool. It seems like if I summarize that in a super simple way, you know, they sort of, you know, serve also as like a filter before you act on anything, which is pretty cool. And even if the advisory board stopped there, it's incredibly valuable. But I would imagine, Eric, that they're probably your biggest referral sources as well, you know, to the firm. Is that a fair statement? Or?
Well, like anything else, you have a bell curve. Some of our advisory board members are wonderful sort of referral machines, and some aren't. I think some of it's your industry, your network, your personality. We don't require that of any advisory board member, but certainly we know for someone to agree to serve and spend that time helping us be better at what we do for them and our other clients, they certainly have some skin in the game and reasons to help us grow in the right ways. They're also wonderful when it comes to beta test a new system or a new deliverable or a new, I mean, you almost get a trial balloon. So we actually have, we have a rotating board. We have 3-year terms and it's a very formal process. And in general, people are honored to be asked and often don't want to roll off after 3 years. I think everyone really enjoys it. And I also know stories where our board members have networked with one another and done business with one another in various ways also, just because they're getting together with another good group of people. So it's been a win-win-win in every way.
Love it. So let's shift and talk about authority in this space, and turning that authority into influence. And I think that the game has changed over the years, more towards mediums that folks spend a lot of their time on, be it social media, podcasting, etc. What's your thought on the importance of building authority and influence, and how have you done it for yourself and BFG?
Building authority is fairly easy. Building authority means getting licensed, getting credentialed, getting experienced, surrounding yourself with specialists or other experts. You're an authority on this very, very early in your career. Even if you don't know everything, once you're in the business, you have a sense and you have some authority. Certainly it can get better, but it starts right away. Influence takes years to master. And I actually gave a talk at a FinCon conference years ago in Dallas about this very topic, about the authority, turning authority into influence. And it means finding ways to reach people and to drive them to take action. And some of that is in publishing. It's in white papers or ebooks or traditional books or podcasts or interviews in various places. It might be philanthropy. It's going to be the things that you love to do that create the ability for you to be around decision makers. And early in your career, for newer financial advisors, it's very, very tough to do. And so what I tend to tell young people who are in the business is join associations or networks or groups that you have interest in, and get on their membership committees and meet lots of people. Start to be known as that guy or gal who's in that space in there. I also think creating a mastermind group is incredibly helpful. And I started a mastermind group in 1995, and we still get together periodically. It's not quite as regimented as it was because we were trying to create a group for young professionals to network, and we're not young professionals anymore. Now we're like all best friends, but that's where it started. And I was always jealous when I was 23, 24 in this business. I was jealous of the folks who said, "Oh, I've been working with so-and-so for 20 years. I said, "Well, I can't fake that. I can't make that up, but I can start to build it now so that in 20 years it'll be there." Kind of like the farmer who plants first and harvests later. And that's another stakeholder group. So we talked about the advisory board. I think a mastermind group makes sense. And I think being part of organizations, but don't just, it's kind of like your resume or your vitae when you're a student. Don't join 23 things and never show up. Join 2 or 3 and really go deep, really get involved, serve on a board, do some nonprofit, make a difference. And people will know you for your character and the things that you do and the work that you do. And it will then naturally translate into influence based on what you do for a living.
Yeah, I think, when you were walking through that, there's 2 categories or paths that you can take simultaneously to build influence. One is boots on the ground, sort of hand-to-hand combat, shaking hands, getting to know people in that sense, and truly build relationships with other human beings. And then there's more scalable ways to be able to create awareness around who you are and not be limited to the folks that are in a particular room that you're in. And through that awareness, you become relevant to folks, assuming that, what you're talking about is of value and interesting or entertaining or a combination of the 3. And I think, from a podcasting standpoint, it's a great way to do that. And what I've noticed, and I'd be curious on your feedback on this, with our podcast, we've been doing it for a few years. And what I realized is when someone books a call on the calendar to explore, working with us, they already kind of know me. Right. And they wouldn't be booking that call if they, weren't really interested in working together. And really the only objection is if, what we charge and their budget isn't aligned. But I've noticed that our sales process has shrunk drastically because they've already spent time with me, quote unquote, in a leverage fashion. What have you noticed as it relates to some of those points with you doing your podcast?
Well, I agree 100% with you. I think it's incredibly important to be authentic. The key to podcasting is to be yourself, to be vulnerable, to be authentic, and to be fallible. And then if you're relatable in that way, people will seek you out. It's important for folks to know that you know what you're talking about, but it's also nice for them to get a sense of who you are and what kind of person you are, and whether that's an organization they would want to get to know more. 5 years ago, I had never heard a podcast before, and now I've got 5 seasons recorded. Like I literally did not know what the podcasting industry was. And again, you were in preschool when I started, so give me a break. But I had to learn all of this from go. And the way I started was sort of doing what we're doing today. I guested on dozens of podcasts before I ever tried to launch a show. I wanted to know how they worked. I wanted to be able to know the difference between a terrific host and one who was unprepared. I wanted to know the difference between shows that had a specific message versus things that were just general conversations. I wanted to understand, and I was on so many shows, and a few of them went viral, like really viral. And I discovered that every show needs to have a call to action. There has to be something that you are giving away that people want. In order to then capture some of those folks. And so I had written a book a number of years ago, just an ebook on how to pay less taxes, because I don't know anybody who doesn't want that. And created a landing page at lowtaxbook.com. And it's a free resource, and it talks about the 4 places that most American investors can put money where it's never taxed again. And I went on a show called Bigger Pockets, which is a terrific show. And we had close to 1,000 people download that white paper in a week. Like, that's absurd. But some of those have now become clients. They certainly are part of our network. There's now word of mouth happening. And so our influence was built largely by being on other shows before I even knew how to do that. I didn't have a show.
It's cool. And I'm a listener of Bigger Pockets as well. So it's cool to hear that you've been on that. And I wholeheartedly agree with having some sort of call to action. Otherwise, on LinkedIn, you know who you're connected to. On Facebook, you know who your friends are. On Instagram, you know who's following you. But on a podcast, you have no idea who's listening, because it just shows up as a listener, right? And no identifiable information. So in order to turn those folks into a real person, so to speak, that you can identify, you have to have some sort of lead magnet that's of value to them to actually get them into your system. So you brought up a very important point that I want to emphasize, which is, if you are going to do a podcast or be guests on the podcast, you just have to be yourself. I think advisors sometimes struggle with wanting to be perfect and have no ahs and ums and not trip. And, hey, can you splice this out? Like, I kind of messed this up. And it's like, no. Like, I personally believe that if it's too produced, like too perfect, it turns people away, because to the point that you made, you're not relatable to them, because they're not perfect, right? And you're actually not perfect either. So the more authentic, the more kind of real and raw you can be in your show, the more you're going to resonate with the folks who are listening. So I'm glad you brought up that piece specifically.
Well, and as a host, asking the right questions of your guest makes a huge difference. And for sure. And being able to elicit responses that get people to say, "Oh my goodness, like I hadn't thought of that." So we ask on our show, we ask every guest what they want to be when they grow up. And the ones who are prepared for that sometimes have something in the can, but those who don't get big-eyed, like, "Oh my goodness, no one's asked me that since I was 8 years old and I wanted to be an astronaut." So it's nice to say, what are you going to do with the next half of your life, or the next whatever percentage of your life that you're blessed to have? What are you going to do with it, and who do you want to be? And I think that's totally different. And telling stories, especially stories that are funny at your own expense. I mean, I have so many. I'm delighted to embarrass myself on your show. I have no problem with that. It's part of the way things go. But it happens to all of us. The things that happen, and as financial advisors, we we really do see it all. People have to be incredibly transparent with us. It's very emotional at times. It's very human. And so you're not always going to be at your best. You're going to have folks break down. You're going to have folks have really hard conversations or have to share things with you. And it's important. None of us are therapists, but we're human beings.
Yeah, you can ask the right questions and listen and respond accordingly. And it helps too from a just connection standpoint when you're able to be vulnerable with someone, like in the first or second time you're meeting with them, like you're locked in. As a side note, hopefully I'm doing fine as a host so far, because it seems like you've been on quite a few shows, so you can give me some feedback afterwards if you'd like.
I promise. I've been on hundreds, and I will gladly share with you the ups and downs. And I can do some consulting for you, David, if you like. I'd be happy to do that.
Well, we consult too, so maybe there's a bartering scenario we can come up with.
Maybe. Sounds good. Sounds good.
So let's take a hard right turn.
Okay.
So we've discussed mission, which is call it the onset of what we should do as business owners, right? Then we've talked about turning authority into influence, and I think you would agree that's just an ongoing game to play, so to speak. But I think it's also important to start with the end in mind with whatever it is we're building. And in order to do that, right, we need to have some level of focus on like, what is the end game? What is the exit strategy? And, you had mentioned before that there's certain things that you can do in terms of mastering your firm's financials to be in a position to exit in a very efficient way and very profitable way, and for not just the benefit of you, but your clients, your team, right, your staff members. So when you mention mastering your firm's financials, what does that mean? Is that more than just making sure that your spreadsheets and things like that are buttoned up? What does that mean?
Well, it's kind of like what we do for a living as financial advisors. We have to take our own advice and do that when we look inside at our own finances, and that not just personal, but for lots of us, our business is our largest asset. And so we have to treat that as a major piece of our own financial plans. And for the company, you do want to position yourself to monetize anything that you're building. But there's so many different ways to do it. And the financial world, the financial planning world has really two primary ways, three if you count dying at your desk and walking away with nothing. But let's throw that one out for now and look at the two. One of them is an internal transition and one of them is an external transition. In the simplest of terms, an internal transition is where you have 1 or 2 or 10 people within your organization who can afford to buy out someone retiring and can build something so that it's a continuum for everyone involved. An external transition usually involves private equity or some larger company, some kind of roll-up, or just it's M&A. It's one firm buying another. And there's pros and cons to both. I mean, the pros to an M&A or the pros to an outside buyer is generally the primary owner is going to wind up walking with the largest return. I mean, that's where EBITDA comes in and that's where you wind up with the biggest check. But I do think sometimes clients and employees and partners are better served by doing something internally, at least in part. And so you really have to look at your organization and say, what can we handle? If most financial advisors did this, the industry would be a lot more stable. And the reason I say it's not is that the average financial advisor is about 64 years old, has no succession plan at all, may have 1 or 2 junior folks in their office, but they're in no position to buy the firm. And they have no succession plan. They might have a buy-sell agreement. They might have things in place to protect their spouse if something happens to them, but most don't. And so I think it's incumbent upon you and I and all of the other folks who consult with financial advisors to have that hard conversation, say, what is the plan? What if something happens to you? And by the way, our clients want to know. If you're a sole proprietor, your clients want to know, well, what do I do if you're the one who has the accident that we're talking about? And if the answer is, well, you'll find somebody, that's not what clients want to hear. Oh, I'm sure you'll be fine. You go in the yellow pages or just go online. That's not the
yellow pages, Eric.
Yes, the online version of the yellow pages. I've dated myself again. It's fine. So see, I'm one of those old guys looking to retire. I'm not looking to retire. But at the end of the day, having a true succession plan, it's incumbent upon us to do this for ourselves, for our families, for our coworkers and our employees, and also for our clients. And if you're not doing that, if you haven't created a continuum for your clients to have lifetime advice, then you're doing it wrong. And, one of the ways to build value in a financial advisory practice is to work with younger and younger clients. Well, if you're anything like me, you don't want most of your key advisors or your doctor or anybody else to be 30 years older than you. You want them to be there long-term and to be there when you need them. So these 20 and 30-something-year-old clients arguably don't want me. They want one of our team. We have 7 financial advisors, and they're varying in age from 25 to me. I'm not telling you, but 25 to me. And so they want to talk to somebody relatable, but they also want to talk to somebody who's going to be there. And so I think that's not only a best practice, but it will help you create more value for yourself and for your family and for your own financial plan to have a house that's in order.
Well, what's interesting is in talking with advisors, I feel like they almost have, and I won't keep the show clean in this regard, but they have like this oh shit moment at some point in their career where they get into the business, as you mentioned, perhaps accidentally, and they like the fact that they can make a lot of money while having a lot of impact and having a lot of independence, right? The 3 I's: income, impact, independence. And then there's this inflection point at some point, maybe 10 years, 15 years into their journey, where they say, oh shit, I actually have a business, right? And they didn't do anything necessarily over that 10 or 15 year period to focus on increasing their enterprise value. And one of the aspects is making sure that you have mastered the firm's financials, but there's also your valuation is determined by more than just your revenue or your EBITDA number or what does your human capital look like? Do you have standard operating procedures inside of the business? Is it a well-oiled machine? So if you did drop dead at your desk, the business can actually still run and people aren't figuring out where to find this or how to do that. Do you have a well-defined marketing plan that brings in a steady stream of business? Are your team members of leadership quality, or are they just worker bees, right? So there's a lot of intangible assets that go into making sure to maximize the monetization of your business for yourself, and especially if it's internal for your team as well. So I think a lot of folks will say, okay, I'm looking to retire in 3 years or 5 years, and they'll start addressing that now, but or start addressing that then. But if you address it now, even if you have 15, 20 years of run room left, like, who cares if you're not exiting anytime soon? You're just going to have a badass business in the meantime. Right. So I think it's never too early to have some sort of exit strategy and focus on building the value of your firm, because the benefit today is having a well-oiled machine. The benefit tomorrow is having much more or much higher financial impact on your life and others because of what you spent time building strategically and intentionally. So I think there's no, it's never too early to start, I guess is my point.
I agree entirely. I think building a business is not why most of us got into this industry. Most of us didn't get in thinking we're going to want to have HR departments and IT issues. And we got in this business because we wanted to work with families and their financial plans. But now, our organization, we've got 21 people. I manage no one, David. I manage no one. I supervise no one.
You just podcasting all day.
I just podcast. I am in charge of business development. I work with a very small number of our clients directly now. And my job is to make sure that the business runs. I'm in charge of vision. I'm in charge of business development. I'm in charge of strategic alliances. I'm in charge of corporate programs and things that will bring in a lot of business for the other 6 advisors who are much younger than me and much more client facing. And, we have dedicated management team. We have a dedicated client relations team who I'd put up against anybody. And at the end of the day, it is a well-oiled machine, and I can disappear literally for a month and no one will miss me. They'll miss my dad jokes, but no one will miss me. The business will run just fine.
That's up for debate if they'll miss the dad jokes, depending on how dad they are.
Listen, I have a 13-year-old. They're bad. They're really, really bad.
That's funny. So you had mentioned something when you were just talking, which leads us into our last topic of strategic alliances. And yes. You may have said it in that regard in a different vein, but it's related. So one of the things I loved when I was an advisor is the culture of joint work, and being able to learn, from other folks, either in my office or throughout the country, people who had different specializations, right? If they worked primarily with business owners or primarily with doctors, like there's certain things or words or phrases that they wove into their conversations that immediately moved them up the pedestal, so to speak, in that, prospect's eyes or client's eyes. And I've found that as people kind of break away from those larger firms and either solo or small ensemble teams, there's a lack of collaboration throughout the industry formally. And they tend to be like in their own silos. But we had talked about forming strategic alliances between firms. So are you talking like we have a strategic alliance with a CPA firm, or we have strategic alliances with like other financial planning firms? How is that?
I'm talking about other financial planning firms. I believe in collaboration over competition. I think our industry is one that's has the benefit of radical abundance. There is so much opportunity. So many people and families and businesses need our help. There's a shortage of financial advisors and an even bigger shortage of good ones. And there's no direct career path to bring young people into the business. And there's a lot of retiring advisors. So this is a business that absolutely benefits from synergies. And so we have a couple of different strategic alliances already, and it's proving to be one of our biggest sources of growth. So for example, we have one firm we work with, and they do asset management, but they don't do any insurance work. And we have an insurance department. So we share and we do the insurance work for their clients, and we don't step on their toes, and it's their client, but we're helping them. We have other firms. We have another firm who only does insurance work, and they don't do financial planning. And so they're in a position to say to their client, you ought to have a financial plan. Let's hire this team over here. And then they're on the same side of the table as the client. We do a plan together. It solidifies that client relationship. It creates additional revenue for that advisor. The client gets a better outcome, and everybody wins. There's firms who specialize in various ways. We don't do 401k plans. So we have a firm that we work with, and we send 401k plans to them because they're experts at it, and we're not. We can't be all things to all people, but we can all share in the success that comes from building that relationship in that tent. And I have seen that work now over many years. And I think the competition piece of this comes from the days of Michael Douglas Wall Street and Gordon Gekko and all of the boiler room type stuff, the garbage out there that was, it was all about me, and I could steal it from you. And it was like this, there was blood in the water, right? Well, I think we're in a very blue ocean. I don't think there's any blood in this water. I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. Some firms only work with folks who have $25 million. And if you don't have $25 million, they don't want to work with you, but they will send you to a firm that works with people like you. There are some firms that won't talk to you under $1 million, and others who would love to do that. And so we've worked with firms in different sizes because we don't have an asset minimum. We have a flat fee structure that allows us to work with folks other firms are walking away from. And we have very profitable, rich, enjoyable relationships with people who are sort of being neglected out there. We call it financial planning for all, and we mean it that way. It's just about for anyone who's in a position to need a financial advisor. We can find assistance for them. And if we don't do it in-house, we will have a relationship that we can help them find the right person or the right group. And to me, that's a win. To me, then now you're a resource, and you're not, hunting other people's prey.
Have you established these strategic alliances and you're batting 1,000 in terms of everyone we've kind of vetted, we have a good working relationship with, or have you had any folks that you've needed to part ways from? And if so, why or what caused that? Like, what are some things people should look out for?
We have not had strategic alliances go wrong. We've had M&A go wrong. So strategic alliances so far, the ones we've chosen because of the way we structure our contract. If someone is sending a client to us and we're working with them as part of a team, and that alliance feels like it's no longer the right fit, we allow them to have the ability to take that client somewhere else. So we're not trying to, we want to work with folks who want to be here, and we want to work with folks whose advisors want them to be here. And if that's ever not the case, we don't want to create a barrier to exit. If there's some reason why someone would rather be served elsewhere, we want them to be able to do that. And so that avoids most conflict on alliances. In terms of M&A going wrong, culture. If you add people to your organization, not just clients, but particularly employees or other advisors, the fit has to be really, really perfect. Or at least incredibly workable and flexible. Because when you run into a situation where you have someone who's not necessarily doing it the way that all of us want to agree to do it, then you have some conflict. And we've had that in the past. We've had advisors leave, and it's okay. There's a spot for everybody. And I think every time we do that, we learn from it, and you try and make your selection process and your vetting process better. But we're never going to bat 1,000 on everything. Invariably, just like we're going to choose to work with a client who turns out to be not necessarily the best fit for us. It happens.
What's interesting about that, and I could be wrong here, but I like that you're legitimizing the relationship, because a lot of advisors have like COIs. Hey, like, let's refer business back and forth, and it's more casual. And it's like maybe you get 1 or 2 a year, if that, and you spend all this time building a relationship and doesn't really, bear enough fruit for both parties. So it sounds like you're legitimizing it, and I have finger quotes up because it sounds like it protects each of you from stealing client, relationship or business or whatever, but it's flexible enough to be able to part ways and not have any sort of bad blood. But the fact that there's a quote unquote contract, to me sounds like it legitimizes the relationship, so that both parties actually take it seriously and say, okay, let's now grow together, as opposed to a handshake deal. Yeah, let's send some business back and forth, and that just falls flat on its face.
Oh, absolutely. And the firms that do that are saying that to 27 other groups and can't possibly do it all. And we don't do a tremendous amount of work with CPA firms. We do some, but we do a lot of work with law firms, estate planners particularly, but also family law and corporate and other things. And I think part of it's because my desire to go to law school led me to be an accredited estate planner. I did not go to law school. I'm not writing any documents, but I speak lawyer. I speak it's kind of like I speak a little Spanish too. I can get around, but it's not pretty. I speak lawyer without going to law school. But, we've built relationships with law firms who are able to incorporate us into their planning in lots of really great ways. We've had less success with CPA firms over the years, I think because that's where the blood's in the water. Because every financial advisor who can fog a mirror is told, get to know the CPAs. And these CPAs, most of them, don't have time to sit and meet with all these folks. And they certainly aren't, they're not looking necessarily for financial planning opportunities. They're trying to beat all of these clocks. I mean, I feel for CPAs. That's an awful job. I would not want to do it. It's important, but it is so, by gosh, it's taxing. There's your dad joke. It's just it's just a difficult thing. It's so deadline driven and so intense during parts of the year that they're not thinking about business development at that point. Most of them are thinking about how do we get more returns done or more audits done or more, how do we get this out the door?
Yeah. I mean, I have some friends that are CPAs and they can't hire other CPAs at all. Like
Right.
there's like a shortage right now because people are, you know, dreaded tax season, and then you have the deadlines, then you have the deadline that's in the fall, and it's just this constant clocks.
Yeah. I mean, CPAs don't see their kids for 3 months every year. Like that's brutal. That's awful. And lawyers, most of them wake up January 1st and they're starting over. They're starting at zero. Mm-hmm. In our business, because these relationships are built in ways that are recurring and perpetual, and the service models, but also the revenue models are structured that way. You have a position to have had a good year by January 2nd. Now you're just adding whatever gravy you want to add. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, it really is. Well, Eric, I feel like I could keep chatting with you. A lot of great insight that you're providing, and the proof is in the pudding as well with the business that you've built. But to transition, one of the things that we ask all of our guests, and it's our way of helping distill a reading list for folks. We're big proponents of continuously growing. You're either green and growing, or brown and rotting. So that said, the two books that you mentioned, I'll start with the business oriented one and then go into the other one. The first book is Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty. Why'd you choose that book? What's the impact that it's had on you?
I read that book early in my career, and it is a book about networking and relationship building and collaborating. It was written by Harvey Mackay, and it is still relevant today, even though the technology has changed. The ways in which we network have changed. To your point, it's not the yellow pages, but I started with like faxing stuff, David. It's true. However, the skills for how to build a network and build a community are still there. And I think it's a brilliant book. Simple, easy read, but a brilliant book. And by the way, while we're talking books, if there are financial advisors out there who are trying to find a resource to become particularly newer financial advisors to grow their practice, the book written by Nick Murray called The New Financial Advisor is an absolute must read for any young or up and coming financial advisor, because it talks about the profession. It talks about how to grow a practice. And it really, he refers to all financial advisors as Noah, as in we know the flood is coming and we only have enough rooms on our ark to take the people who are with us, and let's do this. But he also says that whatever is not impossible is therefore inevitable. It's just a matter of how long it takes. And I love that.
Yeah, I've read that book. I haven't read the first one you mentioned, Dig Your Well Before You're Thirsty, but I'll have to check that out now. So I am very curious. So I think most folks listening haven't read this book since grade school. But it's a book that you continue to read throughout your life, The Catcher in the Rye. Why do you do that?
Well, it's funny that I didn't understand it as a kid. As a kid, it was just sort of a profane diatribe. But now there are a few moments in that book where I really identify with Holden Caulfield's character. First of all, this idea that we're standing in a field trying to catch people when they fall is very much what financial advisors are. We're trying to help people reach retirement or reach financial stability or educate their kids. And it feels a little like whack-a-mole sometimes, like who do we have to catch today who needs us? And so that was the Holden Caulfield piece. But there's a line in that book that I use as my quote on social media and other places sometimes. And it was by one of his teachers, Mr. Antonelli, who said, "The mark of an immature man is that he wants to die nobly for a cause. the mark of a mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one.
I like that. Am I thinking about this right? And it's sort of like, is this related to the idea of making sure that you're falling in love with the process and not being too attached to the outcome, or am I too far off with that? I'm trying to make a connection there.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a reach. At least that's not the way I interpret. That's
I
not the way I
appreciate your
interpret.
honesty.
Well, the beauty of literature is you can interpret it any way you want. It's not wrong. I just disagree with you. No, I think it's about living your life in a certain way, and I think it's about character, and it's about integrity, and it's about being sometimes behind the scenes and not necessarily having to be the star of the show all the time. And when we elevate others, when we elevate our other employees or the other advisors or the other firms we work with or the other podcasts we're on or whatever it is, I think that speaks volumes about us as individuals. And it's so much better than pounding our chest and going, look at me, look at me.
Love it. Well, Eric, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. It's also been nice, when we first connected on our intro call, I feel like we actually connected, which was nice. So hopefully this isn't the last time that we chat. And if I'm listening to this and I want to hear more from you and want to stay connected with you, where should I go?
I will send you to two places. One is brotmanmedia.com, which is where you'll find the podcast and the online courses and the books and all the writing. And the other is BrotmanConsultingGroup.com, and that's for financial advisors who want to talk about building their authority into influence and growing their practices for scalability and salability.
Awesome. Well, for everyone who stuck around and listened to this episode, really appreciate your time and attention. I think there was a lot of takeaways from this. So that said, we'll catch you on the next episode. And Eric, appreciate you joining.
Thanks a bunch. It's been great.
Take care.